Ladies and gentlemen, time for lesson 2.8, round and estimate with decimals. Please write the lesson number at the top of your page and write down the I can statement, round and estimate decimal numbers. All right, things to remember when rounding, and all this stuff that's going to come here, I am going to ask you to put in your math notebook, so you can pause it as you go, or you can wait till we get to the end of this slide and you can put it there, okay? So, the first thing you have to do is you have to identify the place value you're rounding. So let's just say I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, okay? So I'm going to look at that tenths place, and I'm going to make sure I know where that is in my number. Then I'm going to look to the digit to the right of the rounding place. So if the rounding place is the tenth, the first digit to the right would be the hundredths place, okay? If the digit in that place, that hundredths place, is 5 or higher, then I increase the rounding place by 1, and I turn all the numbers that come after the rounding place to zeros. If the digit is 4 or less, okay, then that digit doesn't change, and all the numbers after that rounding place still get turned to zeros. Okay, there's that. Write all this stuff down part here. Okay, so pause this if you need to do that. I'm going to keep going. All right. So visual models for rounding the nearest whole number. Okay, we talk about the nearest whole number. Okay, in this case, we're going to be looking at the ones place, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so let's look at this number line, and let's look specifically at 4 7/10. Okay, which is right there. Which whole numbers does 4 7/10 fall between? Well, it falls between 4 and 5. Okay. What number is exactly halfway between 4 and 5? Well, that'd be that guy right there, 4 5/10. Is 4 7/10 closer to 4 or 5? These are the questions I'm asking myself as I'm working through these rounding numbers. Okay. What's closer to 5? Okay. So, what is 4 7/10 rounded to the nearest whole number or the nearest one? It's going to be 5. Let's look at it for the nearest tenth. Okay, so let's say we're going to look at 1 62 hundredths, and we're going to round that to the nearest tenth. Okay, so which numbers does 1 62 hundredths fall between? Well, it falls between 1 6/10 and 1 7/10. Or remember, 60 hundredths, 70 hundredths, it doesn't matter. That zero doesn't affect its overall value, okay? So what number is exactly between 1 6/10 and 1 7/10? Okay? Well, that would be 1 65 hundredths. Right there in the middle, okay? Is 1 62 hundredths closer to 1 6/10, or is it closer to 1 7/10? What's closer to 1 6/10? So when I round that to the nearest tenth, it's going to give me 1 6/10. Okay, so I'm going to go through some sample problems with you, and we're going to just kind of work through the various place values so you can see this in action. If you need to rewatch this slide again, that may not be a bad idea, but we're going to start by rounding these to the nearest whole number, and that's going to be the ones place. Okay, so I'm going to remember, I'm going to look at my rounding place. Okay, in my rounding place, and this is the ones place, and right now I've got a 6 there. Okay, according to the rules of rounding, I look to the digit immediately to the right. In this case, that would be the 4 in the tenths place. Okay, now if that number is 4 or less, it says everything else becomes a 0. So 6 45 hundredths to the nearest whole number, or the nearest one, is going to be 6, because that number is a 4. Now you could put 6.00. That would not be incorrect, but it's also not necessary. Okay. So let's look at our next one. We've got a 7 in the ones place. Okay, I'm going to look at that digit in the tenths place. This time I've got a number that's 5 or higher, which tells me my rounding place goes up one number and everything else turns to zeros, or in this case, I'm not going to put them there. Okay, the nearest whole number there is 28. But again, if it makes you feel better, there's nothing wrong with writing 28.000. That's not incorrect, okay? Let's look at the next set of numbers. We're going to round these to the nearest tenth. Okay, so I'm going to remember what I talked about. I'm going to find my rounding place. Okay, I've got a 4 in the tenth spot. I'm going to look at the digit next to it. That's a 6. 5 or higher, that tells me that that 4 is going to get 1 added to it. My new number is going to be 35 5/10. Okay, let's look at the next one. I've got 9 and 0, or 0, 9. Wow, I'm tired. 9 23 thousandths, okay? So I'm going to look at the 0, which is in the tenths place, and I'm going to look at the number right to the right of it. That's a 2. Okay, that means that my number here is going to be 9.000, or I could do 9.0, nearest tenth, or I could really just put 9 there. Okay, because there's no value after the 9. Any of those 3 answers would be acceptable. So let's look at rounding to the nearest hundredth. Okay, when we round to the nearest hundredth, we're going to go to the hundredths place. We're going to identify that place value, which is a 6. And I'm going to look to the digit to the right. It's always going to work like this. We're always going to look to immediately to the right. In this case, I've got a 7. Okay, so that 7 tells me my 6 has got to go up 1, and the numbers that come after it become a 0. So this would be 72 and 57 hundredths. And you could put the 0 there, but it's not necessarily, because we're rounding the nearest hundredth. I'm just going to stop in that place value. Okay, and the next number here, we've got a 9 in the hundredths place. The digit to the right is a 1. That tells me that that 9 is not going to change. And if it did, you'd have to recognize that this is now this 19 would actually become 20, but it's not going to change this time. So it's going to be 9 and 19 hundredths. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about estimation, because we do use estimation an awful lot to check answers, and this is a great way to do it. And if we just round these to the nearest dollar, let's take a look at these here. Okay, so I'm going to round these to the nearest whole dollar. So I'm going to go to that ones place in the dollar, which is 5. Okay, and I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, okay, the number next to it is 7, which tells me that that dollar is going to go up and my change is going to be 0. That's going to be $16. Let's look at the next number. I've got a 4 in the ones place. The digit in the tenths place or the dimes place is a 2. That tells me that those are going to become zeros, and my 4 isn't going to change. That's going to be 34. When I add that together, I get $50. Okay. Now let's look at just a plain decimal number. I've got 23 and 41 hundredths minus 9 and 7 tenths. Okay. I'm going to round these to the nearest whole number, 3. I've got a 4 next to it. That tells me that that 3 stays the way it is. Everything else turns to 0, so 23.00. Okay. And then I've got 9, and that's got a 7 next to it, which tells me that's going to go up. That's going to go up to 10. So when I subtract those, it's going to give me 13 even. So when I get my answer in either of these 2 problems, in this one I should be real close to 50, or I should be real close to 13 here. All right, your turn. Here are your practice problems. And of course, you can go back in the slide and look at the stuff before, but you need to round to the nearest tenth, the nearest hundredth, and then I'm going to have you estimate the sum or difference of those last 2 problems. And we'll see you soon.